Man, you know that a government is definitely not corrupt and authoritarian when they have to make people go on the internet and sway narratives in their favor, eh? Despite the fact that using Western, i.e. something the CCP cannot directly control, websites like YouTube and Twitter is against the law in China, that doesn't seem to stop these people from bypassing the Great Firewall and breaking their own government's laws in order to talk about how great their government is. Seriously, let's just take a moment to stop and think about this. Are we actually supposed to believe that the people living in China who endlessly praise and worship the CCP are gonna disobey laws put in place by the CCP so that they can try and spread disinformation to the rest of the world? No. The much more logical conclusion that one can come to here is that the CCP is just allowing approved patriotic citizens, or, employees, to use these otherwise forbidden websites so that they can try and paint themselves out to be the good guys, even though virtually everybody knows about how abysmal the Chinese government's human rights record is. Surely, even if the majority of Chinese people did support the CCP, which is already a massive stretch, there would have to be times when they would be critical of the government, even if it was only in small ways like, this was a good idea, but I think it would be better if this happened. Or, I don't think this new law is necessary. Right? Well, no. Not for the WUMAO. They seem more like bots than they do actual human beings, and in some cases I'm willing to wager that WUMAO accounts actually are bots. For those who don't know, the name WUMAO, or 50 cent, originates from the fact that the CCP reportedly paid people 50 Chinese cents for every pro-CCP comment that they made, at least for a time. It's entirely possible that they are no longer paid per post and are instead just required to do it as part of their duties as a party member, or even because the CCP will throw them in jail if they just don't comply. It's also entirely possible, and even probable in my opinion, that many brainwashed people are actually serving as voluntary WUMAO because sadly they just don't know any better. In a moment, I'm actually going to start showing some examples of WUMAO commenters here on YouTube, but before I do, I would just like to make something absolutely clear. WUMAO, as funny as it is to laugh at their very flawed and often stupid logic, are people too. They have just been brainwashed from a young age to never question the authority of the Chinese Communist Party and to be extremely patriotic. It is absolutely not a question of race. If it were, we would see the Taiwanese, Hong Kongers, and Chinese Americans endlessly worshipping the Chinese government as well, and we don't see that. The only people who spread its propaganda like this are either in China, or are Chinese people traveling abroad, or people who are just paid by the government to spout their propaganda for them. Anybody who actually tries to insinuate that somehow all Chinese people are blind followers of the CCP should be given a big old punch on the nose for allowing the CCP and the WUMAO to have an easier time just calling everybody who disagrees with them racist. That's why, whatever you do, you should not go out of your way to harass any of the people I feature here. It's not going to do any good. They're not going to listen to you anyway. Now, without further ado, how does one be a WUMAO? Before you can become a WUMAO, there are a few basic rules you need to learn and follow at all times. WUMAO rule number 1. You must always, always be supportive of the Chinese Communist Party, no matter what they say or do. They are always right, and everything they say is true, even all that stuff that contradicts all that other stuff. They are completely flawless and glorious leaders, and anyone who disagrees should be locked up in prison for the rest of their lives. WUMAO rule number 2. If you see anyone who dares to disagree with our glorious government, you must absolutely tear into them. They are the scum of the earth. Laugh at them, and find some way to take a dump on whatever it is that they are saying. A useful tip when carrying out rule number 2 is to call anybody who isn't ethnically Chinese, especially white people, a racist for disagreeing with the CCP. If they are ethnically Chinese, however, you should just try to guilt them into taking your side by any means necessary. It's also a good idea just to try and convince them that they are somehow just being corrupted or otherwise influenced by foreign powers. WUMAO rule number 3. Always make fun of America and the West whenever possible. Additionally, try to make fun of the West's freedom of speech by whining about how they only post articles supporting the West, and they never seem to post anything that is supportive of the CCP. Now, some might argue that freedom of speech isn't really a Western-only idea, seeing as it also exists in Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and a few other places out in the East. But the important thing is to remember that we all just use Western to refer to anything that would curb the CCP's monopoly on political power in China. So, in other words, basically just ideas like democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion are all Western ideas, and should therefore always be shunned as the evils that they are. WUMAO rule number 4. The Hong Kong pro-democracy movements were riots. There is obviously no difference between a call to an end of Beijing's authoritarian rule over Hong Kong and just ordinary street riots. As such, the Hong Kong pro-democracy movements were all riots, and those who dared to partake in them are filthy rioters who are probably being controlled by the CIA. These filthy rioters should all rot in prison. WUMAO rule number 5. Nothing happened in Tiananmen Square on June 4th, 1989. Wait, hold on. Okay, I just received an update from Beijing that they have apparently just given up trying to deny that the June 4 incident occurred. Apparently, they're getting mocked so much for trying to pretend that it didn't happen that not even they can pretend that it didn't happen anymore, so we got a slight change of plans here. WUMAO rule number 5.5. Alright, so we admit that something did happen in Tiananmen Square on June 4, 1989. However, the victims weren't the thousands of unarmed pro-democracy student protesters that were killed and injured by the Chinese army on that day. No. The true victims were actually the heroic soldiers that were brutally attacked by the incredibly violent, vicious rioters who were all setting fires to buses and cars. These fires were obviously started because the rioters wanted to burn all of China to the ground, and definitely not as a means of trying to stop the army from slaughtering them. That's why the poor, defenseless soldiers that were attacked that day had no choice but to defend themselves from the evil rioters using their guns and tanks. WUMAO rule number 6. There is no genocide in Xinjiang. There is no forced labor in Xinjiang. It has been an integral and inseparable part of the Chinese territory since the ancient year of 1949. The Uyghur population that has been mysteriously disappearing in the Xinjiang province is voluntarily going to vocational schools where they are voluntarily learning useful skills, such as how to only speak Mandarin Chinese, how to abandon their culture, how to be a puppet for the Chinese Communist Party, and how to only have children with Han Chinese so as to completely breed out their race from within the borders of the People's Republic of China. In case your opponent ever tries to bring up the fact that originally, the CCP denied that these vocational schools even existed at all, or the fact that they had watchtowers that were clearly visible from Google Earth, that were mysteriously removed before any journalists and news outlets were allowed to tour these facilities, then just refer to rule number 7. WUMAO rule number 7. If you can't think of any way to rebut a racist Western argument, then just change the subject and complain about something that is only tangentially related, or even just not related at all. You can complain about any topic you want, or better yet, find just some racist quote from some random person somewhere in the United States, or statistics about anti-Chinese sentiment across the globe, and use that as proof that all Americans are racist. If all else fails, you can just stop responding and walk away, knowing that you have thoroughly defeated the brainless American racist pig who dared suggest that Xi Jinping is not a flawless individual. WUMAO rule number 8. Taiwan is a part of China. The people of Taiwan actually want to be ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, and the only reason that they have a democratic society is because of Western influence and America secretly ruling the island since the split in 1949. WUMAO rule number 9. I know I touched upon this earlier, but I'm going to reiterate it because this is very, very important. You have to know this. There is no genocide going on in Xinjiang right now. There's also no slave labor going on in Xinjiang right now. Even if there was, however, it would, and this is all hypothetically, be okay, because the Uyghurs are actually happy to be our workers for us on our cotton farms. This is evidenced by the very legitimate, and not at all faked videos that they've posted on the internet recently, almost all at once, following almost exactly the same script, using a platform which is not legally allowed in China, in response to news which they cannot legally receive in China, after government officials ordered that such videos be made and posted as quickly as possible. And besides, who cares? The Uyghurs are all terrorists anyway. And finally, WUMAO rule number 10. Remember, the glorious, altruistic People's Republic of China is a peaceful nation who never ever picks fights with anyone unless it's in self-defense and the foreigners are the ones invading on their territory. Ever! Congratulations! You now know how to be a professional WUMAO. Now get on out there and teach those fat Western racist pigs a lesson for daring to interfere with China's internal affairs. I'm Venus Supreme. Thanks for watching.